Well, from the Liberals to the Nationals, and joining me is Nationals leader David Littleproud. David Littleproud, thanks so much for joining me. First, can I get a reaction to the tragic events concerning the floods in New South Wales from you?
Yeah, look, I was in New South Wales in Kempsey and Maxville on Friday. I couldn't get into Taree and some of the other parts, and respecting that there is an unfolding emergency. It's important that we don't sap away resources just in the here and now, but we continue to show our support. This is a senseless loss, and we just got to understand that there are men and women, that some of which are even volunteering in the SES and Rural Fire Brigade. They're putting their lives on the line for us. We're just saying to everybody, please adhere to those warnings. It's so important. They're prepared to put their lives on the line for you. All we're asking you is just to adhere the advice and do what you're asked to do. But please, if it's flooded, forget it. I mean, this is just a senseless loss, and to the families, there is no reason for this, and you'll never be able to give any words of comfort to them. But please, people, water hasn't gone down entirely, so please adhere to the advice because this tragic loss is unnecessary. And to all those emergency service personnel, can I say thank you for your professionalism and your heroism in keeping us safe.
People senior in government have made the point to me that this illustrates again the issue of climate change, this flood event. Do you believe climate change could have played a role here?
Well, I think there's a series of events that leads to underpinning that our climate is changing. I mean, I saw it in Thargomindah about a month and a half ago, a metre over the 1974 flood record. So we've got to understand that, we've got to appreciate that, we've got to, where we can, particularly when it gets to things like insurance, work with local and state governments for mitigation to make sure we can have affordable insurance and do practical measures to make sure that people are kept safe.
I've reported at the top of the program the government's expected to come up with its 2035 target by September, and it's my understanding it's likely to be not as ambitious as a 75% reduction in emissions by 2035. It could be more like 65%. What's your position on that and on the net zero by 2050 target?
We'll have a look at what the legislation and the target comes back in, and particularly how they're going to achieve it, because what I just say to people in the metropolitan area is that we're being asked to bear the burden of this all-renewables approach. We are having prime agricultural land ripped up. The actual thing we're trying to protect, the native environment, with transmission lines, solar panels and wind turbines. We're actually being asked to bear most of the burden, and we believe there's an easier way and a better way to do that protects jobs and protects your food security. So our position as a party room, obviously we, over the ensuing period, will look at policies and positions we've had in the previous term in some respects, and we've looked at net zero a couple of times. The party's position at the moment is to support it, but there'll be further discussions as we move forward and more information comes. But I think what the world is starting to understand, that it's very difficult to get there, but we shouldn't give up on trying to reduce emissions. And in Australia, we're actually far forward than any other country because we have sovereignty of all our resources. And that's why we're saying a technology agnostic approach. And you look at Japan, they actually have about 24% of their grid nuclear, about 30% is going renewables, and the rest will be Australian gas and coal, which they burn, they capture, and then they ship it back to Australia and put it down a hole here. So we shouldn't turn our mind away from any of our resources. We should be pragmatic about it and make sure that we protect regional Australians in being part of the solution, but being part of the jobs. And that should have everything on the table with carbon capture storage, with coal and gas and nuclear, as well as some renewables.
David Littleproud, are you expecting to come to a coalition agreement this week with Susan Lee?
Well, yeah, look, over the last day I received the written response and confirmation that the Liberal Party is prepared to accept the 4 policy areas that were the reason we couldn't sign up to that coalition agreement. They were important to us. They were policy areas that people before I even got into the National party room had fought for and could see would change the lives of the people we represent. And we made great progress in the last term of Parliament, and I wanted to make sure that they remained. And we couldn't get that guarantee.
So you're signing up?
Nor any.
Are you signing up?
Susan and I have had Susan and I've seen that, and now there'll be further discussions with Susan and I over the coming week. But obviously, we've been very clear that there was 4 policy areas that was the reason we left. And I think the fact that the Liberal Party were able to finally appreciate that, unfortunately, it was after we had to give the ultimate decision from our party room, not one we took lightly, one that came with much sacrifice from many of our people, knowing that they weren't going to get paid, shadow cabinet positions, and potentially lose their Senate spots. But we took a principled position, and we're appreciative that the Liberal Party room was finally brought together to appreciate that, and we got a resolution. I think that shows great intent from the Liberal Party, but the Nationals were not prepared to blink. This was important to us, important to our people. And I couldn't go back out here, outside my door, and see the people that I represent. And so I gave up. I traded away the very things that are going to improve your life. That's something that I couldn't do, and I don't believe.
What are the further discussions about? Are they about shadow cabinet roles now, or is there more discussion to be had on the policy front before you agree?
No, Andrew, I've been very clear from the moment we made that very tough decision that there were 4 policy areas that was the reason we lost. This is now just the mechanics and the machinery, and I'm expecting that Susan and I can get to that arrangement in the coming couple of days when we can meet up and catch up. So, but we'll work through that together in a constructive way.
This shadow cabinet lack of solidarity question or demand you put at one point, where did that come from?
Well, again, this came from, we're not asking that we can just run off on every cabinet decision. That was never the intent. But in the last parliament, the Nationals got to a position on the voice before the Liberals could, and we feared they may never have got to the no position. And that actually hurt Peter and my relationship. It set it back some period. And on contentious issues, it was a bit like what happened with the privatisation of the wheat board, the single desk, that on those contentious issues we worked together, we find a mechanism. It wasn't a carte blanche. And in fact, as I've said quite clearly, Susan gave me a response that I was satisfactory with. I thought it was fair and reasonable, accepted. And I think it's been very clear from the outset. That was never the basis of our discussions or in the party room. The decision was predicated on those 4 policy areas. And if you cast your mind back to the very first press conference when we announced that we were leaving, it wasn't for anything else. That's a red herring to say it was on cabinet solidarity. It was on those 4 policy areas. We've been very clear, very consistent from the very start on that. And that was the basis on which we made a principal position to lead the coalition.
Are you embarrassed by the events of the week?
No. You've got to understand and realise that the vast majority of my party room gave me direction that in the timelines that were provided to us and the basis on which there could be no guarantee of those 4 policy areas, that we were to walk away from the coalition. We did it, and within a matter of days, because of our principal position.
You're the leader. Are you the leader, or are Nationals backbenchers the leader? So why couldn't you have said to them, hang on guys, let's wait a couple of days, have more talks before you pulled the pin out of the grenade? Didn't you make a mistake by doing that, by rushing off like that?
No, Andrew, because we'd had an initial decision on the Friday to leave the coalition, and I made it clear that I would go and give it another try. And made representation to Susan about what those areas were, and we needed a guarantee and a process around those 4 policy areas that was not months and months away. So they were fully cognisant of the fact that on the Friday, I had a direction from the party room to move then to leave. And it's not a decision of the individual. That's not how the National Party operates. It's of the collective. Everyone has an opinion and has a say. And so what happened was that we actually took a step back after the sad loss of Susan's mother and not expecting to re-engage for some time. But on the Sunday, they reached out and asked us to continue back and to continue on because there was a need to form a shadow cabinet. We were happy. Obviously, we thought there'd be more time, but they wanted to finalise this and made it very clear that the sticking point was still around those 4 policy areas that I would take to the party room.
All right, well,
and that was what was put, and that was the direction I was given. I can't do anything other than what...
How big a force has Bridget McKenzie been in this? I mean, we saw she wrote to Micaiah Cash threatening to split the coalition in the Senate. Has she really been driving you on this?
No, and I think those were arrangements in the Senate around where people sit, and so I think there's a lot of background and a lot of stuff going around that isn't the facts, and obviously everybody in our party room gets a say. Everyone has an opinion, but it's the collective decision that's determined, and I'm proud of the fact that we had that principled position.
Let me ask you,
because we took it, and
let me ask you after the events of this week, do you believe your leadership is safe? Well,
Andrew, the vast majority of my party room decided to leave the coalition. I enacted what was directed by me, and as a matter of days, because we took a principled position, the Liberal Party decided to revisit their position and yield to the fact that we wanted those 4 policy areas. We didn't blink. The National Party didn't blink. We've made it very clear. These were important to us. This was a principled decision that the men and women of my party room made, and I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the fact that the vast majority did. My job is to represent that, and the fact that we got an outcome in 2 or 3 days because of principles over politics. The men and women of my party room stood up because those policies are going to change the lives of the people we represent. And I'd rather go to that place standing for something, and if I have to lose my job for it, I don't care. But I did what my party room said, and I backed them 110%. I'm proud of the fact that we did this, and we didn't do this lightly. It's not something we took great enjoyment on, but why would we walk away from something that's so important to the people we represent? Wouldn't you want to send people to that place that stand for something? Well, the National Party stood for something.
Well, do you believe...
not going to back down.
Do you
and the
believe,
fact that we can now get to a relationship...
Sorry, but do you believe... I just need to ask you, before we go about these reports, there are people like Barnaby Joyce or even perhaps Michael McCormack who are being spoken to by Liberals about getting rid of you. Do you believe anything in relation to that? Do you believe that Barnaby Joyce is working against you? Is any of this true?
Well, I don't know, mate, but I'm pretty relaxed. You see, since I've been leader, I've been prepared to take the tough decisions. First one to make the decision on the voice, on divestiture, on nuclear, on the RAF, and I led a party that backed those decisions to say that we're not going to walk away from them into the future. And while it was tough, we made the right call, and we've now got that locked into coalition policy, and we're going to work constructively now if we can reform the coalition. And we're not going to use or weaponise this, but there are a few policy areas that are really important to us. And we don't ask for a lot, but when we do, we mean it.
But just on this briefly...
We think this can reset the relationship.
Just on this briefly and finally, don't you risk, as some Liberal moderates warn in their party room, another very effective scare campaign at the next election by going there with a nuclear policy?
Yeah, I think Andrew Bragg's quite right. We've always had a technology agnostic approach. We went into a very detailed approach in policy that allowed a scare campaign of a Labor lie of $600 billion when Frontier Economics clearly showed that. In fact, you were one of the only ones that were able to call that out in the gallery, I must admit. So what we went into, and that was about trying to make sure that we gave confidence around the safety, and then secondly about a scare campaign about where they were going to be located. I think we can nuance that, and Susan and I have had conversation about that, about making sure we take away the moratorium and just be pragmatic. But we limit it to locations in some respects, but we'll work through that. I don't think Australians voted against us because of that. I think work from home was the major policy that hurt us, and we've got to be honest about that. And there are a couple of own goals, not just from Peter, and Peter was left in much isolation, I think. We tried to inject ourselves to defend him, but we didn't do a good enough job. And they made him unelectable, and I think they just weren't able to put a vote next to us, but they held their nose and put a vote next to Anthony Albanese.
David Littleproud, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, mate.